It is the 27th of April 2021, and coming up on this week's episode, we talk all things Formula One in a week where there has been quite a bit of news, both of the good news variety and of the controversial variety. Talking of controversial, a pretty crazy weekend just passed in Valencia for Formula E. Indycar hit the streets of St. Petersburg, NASCAR was in Talladega, the World Rally Championship was in Croatia, and the World Endurance Championship gets underway this week in Spa. All coming up this week on this week's Seba, you know where it's going. Hello folks, and welcome back to this week. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for your continued support, for your comments, for your questions, of course, for hitting that subscription button and ringing the notification bell, and for buying the merch. Hugely appreciative of your continued support, guys. It's been a big week of news, as we said, a lot of racing action over the weekend. We're going to start though with Formula One, which returns to racing this coming weekend in Portimao, but there's been quite a bit going on behind the scenes, including breaking news today down at Ferrari because Callum Ilott, a Ferrari young driver who of course missed out on a seat in Formula One this year, hasn't gone back to compete in Formula 2, was left pretty much racing in GTs, has been signed up, it's been announced today, by Alfa Romeo as their reserve driver for the season, and will get a first run out in free practice one in Portimao this weekend for the Alfa Romeo F1 team. Great news. Callum's a great guy, seriously impressive racer, so much potential. So it's wonderful to see him get behind the wheel of a Formula One car. Cannot wait to see what he can do. In other news, and it is big news this week, Red Bull, their powertrain division has really kicked on, and a couple of big pieces of news broke during the week. First of all, that they've broken ground on the facility which will house the powertrain division over in Milton Keynes. And they said when they broke ground, we want the brightest and the best to come and join this new side of the Red Bull motor racing family. And I think no less than 24 hours later, they'd announced Ben Hodgkinson has signed for them from Mercedes, where he's been for 20 years over at, what's it called? Brixworth. That's the one. He's been there for 20 years, overseeing the engines. It's a big get for Red Bull to bring him on as their technical director. And I think a sign of how much he'll be missed by Mercedes is it was reported over in Germany, I believe at Also Motor and Sport, that he won't actually be able to start at Red Bull until the end of 2022. That's how long his gardening leave is going to have to be. That is how important he is to Mercedes. Fears, of course, that Red Bull will go and plunder now all of the technical departments, all of the engine departments for the brightest and the best. But a real show of force for Red Bull as they really take their destiny into their own hands when it comes to how they will be powered in the future. While we're talking about Mercedes, they stayed on a couple of days after the race in Imola to conduct 18-inch tyre tests for Pirelli, both Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas, and that seemingly went very well. Some great photographs actually out of them, giving a real impression of how those 18-inch wheels are going to look next season. While we're talking about Valtteri, there were some question marks after Imola that the incident between himself and George Russell might have cost him a tub and a power unit, but apparently Mercedes have been able to salvage enough of both that it shouldn't impact them too much down the line. That said, in a cost cap era, an accident of that magnitude is always going to be expensive, and the team said that it might impact their developmental drive through the season. Meanwhile, Red Bull and Mercedes both very aware that this championship fight that they're embroiled in may hurt them in 2022, as they will need to focus until the end of the year on their development for the championship fight in 2021. Looking at 2022, AlphaTauri already saying that they will stick to their guns for 2022. They will shift their focus early to 2022. The change in regulation is simply too big that even though they've got a great car this year, even though there's potential in that AT02, they're not going to waste time focusing on that to the detriment of what could be in 2022. It's interesting because they could potentially, as we've seen, fight with the likes of McLaren and Ferrari for P3. Will they be happy, though, just to settle for P5, which would be an amazing result in and of itself this year for AlphaTauri? It'd be fascinating to see where they end up this year, if they can maximise the potential in that car in the next couple of races. But yeah, they're not being swayed from what was their initial objective at the start of the year, which is to really move that focus to 2022 as early as possible. McLaren has finalised a £170 million sale and lease back agreement for their Formula One factory. So some good news for McLaren in terms of easing up a little bit of cash flow for the Formula One outfit. Now, a couple of bits of news that aren't necessarily to do with the teams themselves. Firstly, Suzuka has announced that it has got a new deal to host Formula One in Japan until the end of 2024, which is massively good news because everyone loves Suzuka. The drivers, the teams, the fans. Formula One isn't Formula One without going to Suzuka, one of the world's great circuits. So yeah, delighted that Formula One will be going back there until 2024. We said at the top of the show, though, that there was good news in Formula One. There's some good news. There's also some controversial news because, finally, the deal has been done to bring sprint races to Formula One in 2021. Now, I made a video about this earlier in the year while the plan and the project was still being discussed and debated, and it wasn't really finalised how it would look or what it would be, but it was pretty much there. It will be a Friday morning practice session, followed by qualifying Friday afternoon, then a sprint race on Saturday, which will set the grid for the main race on Sunday. I have my reservations. I really have my reservations. The one good thing, less practice, more data, less time on track, theoretically, more jeopardy. The sprint race itself, at the moment, for me, just feels like a 100-kilometre extension of the Grand Prix itself. The heroics in qualifying, a George Russell finding himself in P11 or P12, a Mercedes that finds himself out of position, potentially like Valtteri Bottas found himself down in 8 in Imola, will all be resolved, will all be rectified by the end of a 100-kilometre race, meaning that by the time the Grand Prix starts on Sunday, you could just get 2 by 2 by 2. The order, the surprise, the thrill, the interchangeable nature of what a grid can be as created by qualifying has the potential to be nullified by this 100-kilometre race. But look, it's good that Formula One's trying something, good that it's shaking it up, good that it's actually giving something a go rather than just saying, oh, we don't like that for whatever hypothetical reason and throwing it out before they've even trialled it. So good to see there's a trial. For my money, I would have liked to have seen 2 or 3 different ideas trialled throughout the year to see which one, if any of them, worked. But as I said, when we made the video originally, hopefully the regulation change into 2022 will be such that we won't even need to mess with qualifying because the product itself will be strong enough, good enough, and the racing will be exciting enough that we won't need to change qualifying at all. Into Formula 2 now, and Formula 3, might as well cover them both at the same time, and both championships were testing this week at Barcelona. Felipe Drugovich finished Formula 2's 3-day test on the top of the pile, narrowly ahead of Oscar Piastri and Richard Verschoor. Title leader Guan Yu Zhou found himself way down the order, though. He was 14th fastest at the end of their test, with the impressive Liam Lawson, who sits second in the early championship standings, actually finding himself 5th fastest overall. In Formula 3, Victor Martins dominated their 2-day test, topping both days, with Smolia and Jack Doohan 2nd and 3rd. Formula 3 will have its first round of its 2021 championship at Barcelona when Formula One arrives there in a couple of weeks' time. In IndyCar, a great weekend at St. Pete from Colton Herta for Andretti. One of those rare weekends where a driver doesn't put a wheel wrong. No one could touch him. He was just invincible on the streets of St. Pete. Great weekend. Challenging weekend, though, for all the drivers. The aero screen combined with the Florida heat made it a very intense, very physical challenge for all of the drivers. Joseph Newgarden made up for a disappointing first weekend out at Barber with a podium. Simon Pagenaud also joining him on the podium. One of the standout drivers for me for the weekend, though, and actually for this early part of the season, was Jack Harvey, whose fourth place in St. Pete puts him sixth in the early championship standings. Alex Palau, race 1 winner, still leads the title race from Willpower and Scott Dixon, who are level on points. Herta now is fourth, with Pagenaud fifth. Spot of IndyCar news since St. Pete is that Connor Daly has been confirmed once again in the number 59 Carlin for the oval rounds of the 2021 season, meaning that Connor will get a full year of racing in IndyCar. So absolutely delighted for him and his mullet. It's great news, especially as the first oval round of the season is this very weekend at Texas Motor Speedway. The Genesis 300 and the XPEL 375 come your way from Texas on that doubleheader on Saturday and Sunday. In Indy Lights, David Malukas and Kyle Kirkwood shared honours between them with a race victory apiece in St. Pete, and it was a really important weekend for Kyle Kirkwood after a difficult first weekend at Barber Motorsports Park. Malukas, with his victory and just his brilliant run of form in the opening races of the season, now tops the championship from Linus Lundqvist, with Kirkwood with that much better weekend in St. Pete lifting himself up into third in the championship. Meanwhile, in USF 2000, which I completely forgot to mention from Barber, my apologies for that, Christian Brooks has taken the lead of the championship there with an utterly dominant weekend in St. Pete, taking both victories. Got a really good feeling about Christian. Think he's a very talented young man and already sort of taking that USF 2000 field by storm. Can't wait to see how he and the field fares in this 2021 season. But yeah, I've got an eye on Christian because he... for me, seems like a really, really talented young man. The road to Indy returns at the Indy GP in May. To Formula E now, and before we get to the racing itself, the good news from the weekend, which is that NIO have signed up for the third generation of the championship. Great news that another team will be back for that third iteration of Formula E. Also great news that the championship has firmed up its plans for the second half of its 2021 season. There will be races in Puebla in Mexico, in New York City, in London and in Berlin to bring this 2021 season to an end. The headlines, though, would turn sour for the championship as the first race of the doubleheader in Valencia ended in an absolute farce, as the usable energy that the drivers had at their disposal was depleted so much after the safety car periods that they didn't have enough left to complete the race. If there's one thing Formula E has always struggled with, it's the messaging around the championship over range anxiety. It began right at the start when they had to have two cars and change cars mid-race, to now have a race that cars were dropping out like flies because there wasn't enough energy left in them, out of a situation which was wholly avoidable. The decision to deplete the usable energy after the safety cars is a discretionary one. And Formula E then determined that they would blame reigning champion and the man who was at the point the race leader, Antonio Felix da Costa, for not slowing the field down more once the safety car had pulled in. It's just weird. Antonio, I think quite rightly, got very upset about that, as did most commentators as well. Derided the fact that Formula E should choose to try and blame their champion for not slowing down. In fact, the same thing very nearly happened in the second race. It was slightly more normal. I should mention Nick de Vries won the farce of a race. Deservedly so. He had more energy than anybody else. Drove brilliantly, but it was a mad, weird end to the race. Jake Dennis, from taking his first pole, took his first win in the second race of the weekend. Great drive from him with Lotterer second and Lynn on the podium as well. But Had Dennis actually crossed the line, I believe it was a second or 2 seconds later than he had done, or earlier than he had done, they would have had to have done an extra lap and then the final lap, and they wouldn't have had enough energy to complete the race. So it would have been 2 races in a row that they hadn't had enough energy to complete the race, which just seems baffling. All a bit silly, and really does nothing for the championship's credibility as it approaches its 3rd generation. You know, range anxiety is something that the championship has got to put to bed. The Mercedes duo of Nick de Vries and Stoffel Vandoorne now lead the championship after Valencia. The World Endurance Championship finally gets its round underway this coming weekend with the Spa 6 hours, and the prologue is happening as we speak with cars on track at Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. It's great to see the cars finally on track, although the disparity in pace between the hypercar class and the LMP2s is going to be really fascinating. The LMP2s are rocking massively high speeds down the straights and through the speed traps because they've got to, by regulation, run the low downforce trim, low downforce setups on their cars for the whole season. There are going to be a lot of headlines, I think, about the disparity between LMP2 and the hypercar class. But, you know, that's what's been mandated. We'll wait and see how it all shakes out once the 6 hours actually starts this weekend. But I cannot wait for the World Endurance Championship to start back up. And while we're talking about WEC, a really lovely story for the week. Jan Magnussen, Kevin Magnussen will unite as a father and son team for the Le Mans 24 hours later this year in LMP2. Probably the last occasion they'd be able to do it, as Kevin is going to be a Peugeot Works driver from 2022. But their one opportunity to do it, and what a beautiful thing for a father and son to be able to do. In NASCAR, a terrifying crash for Joey Logano at Talladega, in which his car became airborne, has led to investigations into how it occurred and thoughts as to how that kind of thing can be stopped from happening again. His teammate, Brad Keselowski, who went on to win the race, said that this kind of accident just can't be allowed to happen in the sport, and it was a really scary one. Some of the onboards of Joey flying over their heads it was like something out of a movie. Completely crazy. Brad's win was an absolute rock star win. Last lap pass in overtime. Beautiful drive, as you would expect from someone of Keselowski's incredible pedigree. The top 3, though, in the championship all had, well, Joey obviously was upside down at one point, but they all had a pretty horrible weekend. But Hamlin still leads the title from Truex Jr. and Joey Logano in 3rd. The Tour rolls into Kansas this weekend. Now, the World Rally Championship had a fantastic event in Croatia at the weekend as Sebastian Ogier survived a road accident in between stages. Changed lanes without indicating. Rude boy's trying to pass him. I think trying to race him off the lights. And damage to his car. Managed to fix it though. Got back on and won the rally from Elfyn Evans by less than a second. It was actually the 3rd closest finish to a rally in WRC history. The Croatia rally proving to be an immediate hit. A huge success in a beautiful country, which I love. So great to see that. Great to see it running really well. Great to see it being so successful. And hopefully back in the not too distant future. Ogier's win puts him top of the standings now on 61 points from Neuville on 53 and Evans on 51. Next up for the WRC is the Portuguese rally at the end of May. Tomoki Nojiri became the first back-to-back winner in SuperFormula in, I think, about 3 years, with victory at Suzuka after pole sitter Fukuzumi had a puncture and fell down to 19th place. Nobuharu Matsushita, who was marking his return to the championship, had a disappointing run to 13th. Nojiri now leads Hirokawa in the championship with almost double the points in the standings, but as he said to the press, he's only too aware of the threat posed by his rivals. And that, folks, is it for this week's episode of This Week. A lot to digest, a lot to take in, a lot of racing coming your way over the next few days, though. As we said, the World Endurance Championship, the Spa 6 hours coming your way this weekend. Looking forward to that and finally seeing the World Endurance Championship start up its 2021 season. NASCAR, of course, is in Kansas, Indycar is in Texas, and Formula One will be in Portimao, and lots of other championships racing around the world too. Thank you so much, folks, for your continued support. Thanks for tuning in. We've enjoyed having you along, but for now, that's your lot, and we will see you next week for the next edition of This Week.